You're listening to Always Player One, a solo board gaming podcast.
Hello and welcome to Always Player One. I'm Scruffy.
And I'm Norm, and today we're going to be talking about Civitas Nihilium. Is that right, James?
That's correct. listening in with like very intent ears. Yeah, that's perfect.
Nailed it, one take. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about Civitas Nihilium. Civitas Nihilium is a cyberpunk game. It's very interesting, and we are also joined today by the designer of the game, James Bradley. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a great honour. Thank you.
That's really nice of you. And this is a very special episode for us because it's actually the first time that Always Player One has been sent a copy of the game very, very generously by the developer, by James.
Wow.
So, yes. So Civitas is always going to have a very special place in our hearts as the first game to come to us this way. And we're very grateful for you joining us to talk about it with us today.
James is having doubts now. He's sat there thinking, what's wrong with these guys? Why is no one else?
No, I know game designers. They're precious with their wares. It's understandable.
Just before we begin, I wanted to talk a little bit about how you guys can support the show. As you know, we've been running a Patreon for a while, and if you sign up to our Patreon, you can get access to our behind-the-scenes show, The Planning Phase. The Planning Phase is a little 30-minute show, which is released every off week. Every time we don't release an Always Player One episode, on that Friday, we release a Planning Phase instead, exclusive to our patrons. You know about that already. We've been talking about that for ages. What's new, though, is we now have a coffee page where you can go and you can buy us a cup of coffee. We'll be using this to set goals for the show. We're currently looking to get hold of a copy of Lost Ruins of Arnak. And if you log on to our coffee page, which is in the description, you just scroll down and click on the link on the description. You can donate as little as $3, I believe, is the minimum donation, and that will go towards our goal of getting a physical copy of Lost Ruins for the show. I think we're covering that on episode 27, Scruffy, is that right?
Yes, I think so.
It's okay. I knew. I just wanted to put you on the spot, that's all.
There is a time limit on that one. We need to have that one filled before we record the episode, obviously. So if you are interested in hearing about our impressions of how the Lost Ruins of Arnak plays and how it plays in the real world, then do buy us a coffee over there and help make it happen.
Excellent. But enough about us. Let's crack on with Civitas. And before, James, I know you're chomping at the bit to get started, but before we dive in, Scruffy's going to tell those who haven't played a little bit about the game.
So Civitas Nihilium is a game of multiple iterations. It has a few multi-platform versions, you could say. The main focus of this episode is going to be the board game, and we will also be talking about a text adventure video game. So in the board game, you take on the role of a detective and a rookie attempting to solve several crimes. The way you do this is you gather evidence and manipulate 3 different resources by undertaking trials that come in the form of cards in your investigation timeline. These cards can be witnesses, locations, and encounter cards. And the trials often involve you rolling a D10 fate dice, comparing it to 1 or 2 stats on your characters, and then seeing if you are successful. The different resources are used in different ways to further your ability to encounter more of the cards, and ultimately your goal is to remove the evidence from the crime you're investigating and undergo the trials on that final encounter card. Once you've solved 3 crimes, you win the game. That is, if you haven't worn out your investigator along the way through wounds or a loss of reputation, forcing them into obscurity. I think that's a fairly good summary of the game. Am I missing anything? Norm, am I missing anything, James, that you would you want to add?
I would add the immersive soundtrack, the play alongside soundtrack that goes with the game.
Of course,
just because it's one of the things that took me forever to do, and it cost an arm and a leg to get it right and get it mastered and stuff. So yeah, it's where the value really sits in the game itself. I think that's how I feel about it. Anyway, it's a very important part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I had it on while I was playing, and I have that one in my notes to ask you about as well later in the show. So I'm sure we'll circle back to that.
Oh, I personally think you did a great job, Scruffy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, very good.
Okay, so without any further ado, let's go ahead and bring James on the show. So, James, for people who aren't aware of who you are or haven't heard of your games before, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself? How did you get into the gaming hobby? What kind of games do you enjoy playing yourself? And what are you most known for in the hobby?
Okay, great. So my name's James Bradley. Hello. I guess I started my fascination with board games when I was in the Royal Navy. I was a aircraft engineer for 4.5 years when I was in my very early 20s, from the age of 17 to 21 and a half. I think that seems about right. Yeah. I left just after September the 11th happened. And in the Royal Navy, you spend a lot of your time sat down doing nothing. And we played a game called Uckers, which is a game like Ludo that's been manipulated over several hundred years of time within the Royal Navy. And inside every ship, you play this game called Uckers, and every ship has a board. And on the back of the board are written down the times when people have like 9-bitted you. So like playing pool when someone beats you at pool and they 8-ball you. They write on the back of the board where it happened, and we had a board on board our ship, the Ark Royal. You turn it over and you had a look, and it literally went all the way back to the Falklands. It was fantastic to see all these different people playing it and stuff, and I just got obsessed with playing that game. And I left the Navy at the age of 21, like I said, and kind of dibbied and dabbled about with different things. I moved to Oxford and studied at the Oxford School of Drama and became a professional actor.
Wow.
I studied acting and then moved into film production, and now I run a company called Liftoff Global Network out of Pinewood Studios. And my fascination for board games still exists. So I've been doing the board games on the side as sort of a vocation, sort of a vacation, I guess, not vocation. And I've tried to merge the two together to make it more of the hobby becomes something that I earn money from, or not earn money from, but enable myself to kind of, I guess, platform it, I suppose is the right kind of word. It's not really, if it pays for itself and it's a symbiotic ecosystem, then that's the kind of the role. I want it to be able to be something that I can do in my free time that isn't just consuming everything. So I've managed to achieve that with the Civitas Universe and the first game, Civitas Nihilium. I got into solo player gaming when I realized very early on, well, not very early on, but very sort of midway through a relationship that I was having with one of my ex-partners. She said that she really liked The Lord of the Rings. Now, I loved board games, and she wouldn't play any of them. So I got her The Lord of the Rings as a card game, and she wouldn't play it. I tried and tried and tried, and she wouldn't. And then when I was moving out, boo-hoo-hoo, when I was moving out of the flat, when we were going our separate ways, I literally had the box in my hand, and it said on the box for 1 to 2 players. And I was like, 1 player?
Yes.
And that was it. I thought, right, okay, I'm going to put a log on the fire. I'm going to put on the soundtrack to The Lord of the Rings. I'm going to learn how to play this game, and I'm going to play the Lord of the Rings card game on my own with the fire blazing and the Lord of the Rings the soundtrack on, and that was it. I was just immersed in Middle Earth. I loved it. Absolutely loved playing. It was wonderful. It was like being back in the book, being back in the books. I loved all three of them. They're fantastic, and the films were wonderful. And just playing the game, it was like another level. It was like a multimedia experience that I didn't think was possible with board games. And I thought, right, well, that's good. And it kind of sat in my mind. And I've played other games since. Like I've had an obsession with playing Risk Godstorm. That was one of my entry drugs into the super thematic board game world, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, there was all sorts of different things, and it just kind of like sunk in from there, really. And I've ended up just having this fascination with solo board gaming ever since. And yeah, I thought I would merge the three things together that I love the most, which is cyberpunk, love the cyberpunk subgenre. Solo play on board games, love that, and I really enjoy pixel art. So I thought I'd bring the three together.
Wow, what a story! That was really interesting and a lot to unpack there for sure. It's nice to hear you're a fellow lovey. But yeah, that's, oh my god, what an exciting journey into it. And you're talking about the Lord of the Rings game there. Is that the Legacy card game?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I also love that one. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and we've mentioned it a few times on the show.
I mean, immediately, so I used to live in Oxford as well. So my immediate response was like, "Oh, have you been to Thirsty Meeples? Oh, have you been to the Gameskeeper? Oh, have you been to all these amazing shops that Oxford has that sells?"
Oh, Oxford is fantastic for it. I used to live on the Cowley Road on Princes Street, right by which I think is the Gameskeeper there.
It is,
yeah. And I went in there one day and asked the chap, I was like, I want your most highly thematic, most intense board game you've possibly got available. And he just sort of like looked up at me. He was like this old crone of a man. He was like, the game with which you want to play is Twilight Imperium.
Wow.
He got it off the shelf and like blew this dust off it. And I was like, wow, a board game for £100. I was like, Mum.
Did you end up giving it a go?
Yeah, I actually bought it right there and then, and because I'd only just got my student loan in, and I didn't eat for about a week and a half, I think. But I played a lot of Twilight Imperium.
Yeah, it's a fantastic game, isn't it?
So good, so good.
But going back to, you mentioned your love for the cyberpunk universe. I'm wondering if you can kind of unpack the inspirations or the style of cyberpunk that you're going for with the Civitas universe, just to put our listeners into the picture with you, James.
Yeah, sure. So cyberpunk is the subgenre that was created by William Gibson, the guy that wrote Burning Chrome and Necromancer. He had this whole idea of giant cities and augmented human beings, and this next step in the human evolution where man and machine combine, and where the internet is literally just on acid around the world. Just it's spread into everything. It's gone into human tissue. It's controlling a lot of things. And the cyberpunk is sort of like if you were to get technology and to get like the sort of subculture of tattoo, of dance music, of like strong techno, that kind of stuff, and you were to kind of like turn the volume right up, you end up with like an ultra commercial, weird tapestry of just neon and everything that's just rad with the world. And I just think it's just wicked. It's Blade Runner, right? It's Blade Runner 2049. It's Minority Report. I'm a big Philip K. Dick fan. I really love the writings of Philip K. Dick.
Yes.
He's written, obviously he wrote Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which became Blade Runner. And my favorite book, which I implore everyone to read, which is The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, which is a little bit cyberpunk, but a little bit more sci-fi, but it's fantastic. But the cyberpunk aspect of it all, like the anime, like Akira and Ghost in the Shell, really come close to that kind of like machine takes over, but also there's like a weird existential crisis at play. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, I don't know how many times you've played Civitas Nihilium, but there are a bunch of guys in the game called Gleeheads who think they're in a game. And they're starting to say, like, we actually, hang on a minute, we're in this, we see the Godhead, we can see you pulling us out of the box and flipping us and pressing us down on the table. We know that they're having these crazy hallucinations. So the idea is that Civitas Nihilium is actually a real dimension. It's actually real, and it's the creativity is creating it. I've always played with the idea that maybe Star Wars is real, and like maybe George Lucas is just like a caveat for this like world, and he's like linking into it. I mean, you can tell you're probably going to think I'm absolutely nuts saying that sort of stuff, but I just love the idea of people inside a game having an existential crisis, like the Truman Show, you know, that kind of thing.
Yes,
that's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean that does definitely really come across in the theme and in every single kind of card and interaction in Nihilium. You can tell that there is just so much depth in your concept of the world. Like you clearly, it's not surface level. You know, you could spend hours luxuriating in each card and really
Yeah.
build up an image of the world. And then that then follows on to the text adventure game where it opens up another level, doesn't it? And you actually take on the role in that of a specific individual and kind of explore different paths within that game. And it's a massive lore dump, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a story generator, Civitas Nihilium. Really, I think that another passion of mine is role playing games. I love 1,000-Year-Old Vampire. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
one of the greatest games ever made, and I've managed to get hold of a copy. I think one of the chaps in your Discord actually has a bit of an obsession with it as well, and it's excellent. And I mean, just the other day, I was playing a samurai warrior on the banks of a river, observing the death of my enemies whilst they were doing the ritual by disembowelment and being kicked into the water by their wives. And then
Wow.
I got bitten by, yes, crazy. I got bitten by a ninja that was a vampire, and then I ended up becoming traveling to San Francisco and becoming an engineer for the war machine of the Union during the American Civil War. I was just like, I mean, for story generating, that is just fabulous, right? And I
Mm.
don't think I'll ever get that close, but Civitas Nihilium definitely. If you're into creating deep stories and you want to play a game that reveals itself over time, that's hard as hell to play, that does harm you, because the wins are always so much greater when the risk is so much higher, I think. And if you can play it with that kind of attitude, with a look to try and create an actual storyline, like maybe if you die, you then decide to like promote the rookie or do something else with it. You can shape the game to your pleasing, really, because there's so many cards, there's so many dice, there's so much to do with it, and that the rules really are kind of set loosely in stone, really. And the more that the players that backed it on Kickstarter have started to realize that, the more that they've started to come up with their own versions of the game and have interpreted it differently, which I think is absolutely fantastic, and I really encourage it. So it's been a journey in itself. It's so much fun.
Yeah, it does feel like it's a sort of game that I think both of us have really only scratched the surface with, even in the time we've had it. And the first time I played it, I think I had the wrong mindset going in, because I tried to blitz it in a quick session. But it's a sort of game that could very easily stay out on the table for multiple kind of
Yeah.
days, because it can. I kept drawing a card from the encounter deck that meant I had to start a sort of side quest to the main quest. I can't remember the name of the card, and it kept coming back up and back up, and it felt like I was in this infinite loop of following these sort of weird.
That's cyberpunk for you.
Exactly, this is what I'm saying. So it's incredibly immersive, but in terms of time commitment as a game experience, you definitely have to approach it with a very different attitude to how you would approach most modern games, and that, I think, goes beyond just pacing and your sort of success failure criteria, which you hinted at just now.
Sure.
And I think we'll definitely circle back to that. But I think it's also mainly to do with, and this really hits to your point there, is that the Civitas Nihilium, for me, it seems like a game that really embraces chaos, right? It plays a lot like the sort of retro board games like I'm thinking of Escape from the Castle and things like that, where the fate of your heroes are very much determined by the flip of the next card. And you
Yes.
don't see that level of anarchy and chaos in modern games. It's something that's kind of smoothed down, and people there's a much more in kind of the zeitgeist, I guess, of board games nowadays, to kind of shift that away from randomness and into the player a little bit more.
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because it's
Mm.
the question of, do you want to play a game that simulates a world, and do you want to be a caveat within the theme of that world, or do you
Mm-hmm.
want to just play a numbers game, and if your numbers game doesn't work out, play a different numbers game next time, and then maybe that will help, and then that's kind of it.
Yeah.
It's funny because we do the reviews have been completely split down the middle for the game completely, because a lot of people don't. It's not for them. That kind of, they want to play a game where they feel very much in control, and they can make decisions, and it has outcomes, and that's the way it goes. And that's totally fine by me. I know players that can't play Risk because they just can't handle the fact that there's risk involved. They just don't want to do that. And I mean, okay, that's totally fine. But when you think about history, and you think about, it took 300 Spartans to kill 9,000 Persians or whatever, these things happen. Chaos occurs throughout time. And we've got so many different stories that we can conjure up, that we can create. And I feel that the best experiences always come from being in a state of constant vulnerability. And I think that if you feel like, oh God, I better take an upgrade now. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, what have I got available? I've only got this. Oh sugar, should I take this? Should I not? Should I? Oh my good. That feeling of anxiety is, I think, is visceral. And I think it's important to have that when you're playing a solo player game, or else what's the point? You might as well just sit at the table, unpack it all, and say, I've won, and not play it.
It's very interesting. Our last episode, we spent a very long time talking about different types of randomness in games, and I think the games that are on the sort of hotness on BGG at the moment all tend to be either medium to heavy Euro games or medium to heavy hybrid games, and it's almost not fashionable anymore to be a genuine, immersive, chaotic, output random engine, which Civitas is. And that's one thing that I found personally just really refreshing, and also a really nice connect to its medium. As you said in your example, Scruffy, that idea of being stuck in a loop. And James, you quite rightly said that's cyberpunk. It is a dangerous setting. It isn't friendly. This game, it's not you're not here to have a nice time.
It doesn't play by the rules that you understand board games to play by.
Yeah, your character is going to have a tough time, and I like that. You mentioned you like role-playing games. I know, James, we've spoken about this. We're both big fans of Shadowrun, which is a cyberpunk role-playing game.
Oh yeah, I love Shadowrun. Love it.
And it shares the same kind of feeling as even older, like something like Cyberpunk. Is it 2077? The role playing game? Yeah, I mean, all of them share this same feeling of peril, of real peril, and I think the level of randomness in Civitas adds to that feeling of peril and danger. And this is a sharp world with sharp edges, and it's interesting. And it's like you said, James, it allows you to gives the player agency in a different way. It gives players agency over how they're going to experience a story. Like you said, do you want to play as a rookie next time who's sort of avenging the loss of your first character? Do you want to? It kind of it's a storytelling machine, and I think that's a really nice way to put it, James. And I think it's important to say it as well, and be honest about that, because like you said, that's not going to be for everyone. But
no, definitely not.
Yeah, I think that was really interesting and perfectly fitting with its setting, in my opinion.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that we've played a lot on Twitch with a lot of the backers and stuff, and you can check out our Twitch channel. We've not been twitching recently. I say twitching. We've not been twitching. I've been twitching. We've not been Twitch streaming recently, but that's a shame. We need to be doing a little bit more of that. But the randomness can be countered if you get a really good combination between your main character and your rookie. So if you combine, say, the one that can do heals in between trials, and then you get one that can spend wounds to increase dice rolls, you can have the rookie healing the main character in between trials all the way through. So the rookie is like a medic, and it just helps you to bump up your score, and at the same time get your health back when you release yourself of some HP. So there are tricks within the game to kind of get around that, but you're not going to be able to sort of reveal it unless you play it loads, because you'll suddenly realize, oh my gosh, there's I need to focus on locations because the locations are a lot less deadly than dealing with witnesses. I can force encounters if I want to. There's all sorts of different tactics that you can do that can actually minimize the randomness if you wish. It's just to sort of practice the game a little bit more and get your head around that sort of aspect of it, I think.
I think this is probably something we should have outlined before we started this down this rabbit hole. But in typical Always Player One style, we are doing things a bit out of order.
Nice.
So we should probably unpack quickly what the main random elements are in the game for people listening who haven't played it. So from my experience, the sort of most common thing was the encounter deck. And the way this happens is that during your turn, you have a set of cards in front of you, kind of almost your hand of cards, that is what your potential trials that you can face. Some of them will have requirements that require your characters to have certain resources to be able to even attempt the encounter. And like I said in the description, you have to roll on those cards to potentially succeed or fail at gaining evidence, gaining more resources to take on more trials. But if you ever reach a point where you can't encounter the next location or witness or whatever card is in your investigation timeline there, or your hand, then you have to draw an encounter card. And that for me is the real point of the game, because it can lead to these kind of like I hinted at before, these kind of infinite loops of disaster, but also they can lead to really fortuitous cards. And so that is kind of the main point of randomness I noticed. And because some of those cards are particularly volatile as well. For example, making you roll your resource dice. You track your resources with dice, and you might have to roll them all and just end up with a random, either good or bad load of resources, which is a nice kind of balance breaker there for if you're doing really well, it can be crippling, but if you're struggling to get anywhere, it can be extremely useful to hit that card.
Builds that anxiety that James was talking about earlier.
Yes. Are there any other sort of moments in the game that I'm missing there, or would you say that's the main?
There are points where upgrades don't work. If you roll a 1 on a particular upgrade, it could heat up and burn your arms off.
Yeah, so the upgrades, yeah.
There's stuff like that. It's brutal in a way that I think the game Nemesis can be quite brutal. And I don't know if you guys know the game Nemesis at all, but that's very, very, very hardcore. And again, a story generator, exactly the same sort of premise. But it's I mean, the encounter deck is an interesting one. I always look forward to getting the cards that make me roll my resources and stuff, because I like the idea of having to realign and reassess the situation that I'm in. Because I tend to try and build as many cards as possible. I pick trials on cards that bring in more cards into the timeline, so I have a longer timeline ahead of me, just in case I hit a situation where I can't qualify to go to a location, or I can't qualify to speak to a witness because I don't have enough reputation. And if that happens, sometimes I force it to happen because I'm really low on resources and I want to get more resources. So an encounter card could help with that, especially if you're rolling randomly again, or not. Or it's all kind of tricky. But it's funny, isn't it? Because when you design the game, you know the loop, you know the way through it all, and like I feel like I win more than I lose playing the game. And I feel like the backers, when we Twitch stream, they tend to win more than they lose, which is kind of cool. But I did the other day. We have been doing some run throughs. We're trying to do the game 4 years in the future to see where the rookies have gotten to. And myself and the backers from Kickstarter are all getting together on our Discord, and we're playing games over a period of time where we're seeing what happens to the rookie at the end of the game. And if the rookie is like super like maxed out to the maximum, really highly upgraded or whatever, we're preserving that rookie from that player's game and putting it into the next game 4 years in the future. So they get that rookie has its own card. So if it has like a mechanical hand, or if it's got something else, or if it has like super reputation, that will then be like a main character in the next game, which I think is quite cool.
That's amazing.
That brings up a couple of things I wanted to unpack. I want to circle back to the Civitas universe as a whole in a moment, because we've mentioned that it's a multi sort of platform project that you're running at the moment. But one thing I wanted to sort of bring up is there is a great community around this game. It's evident. If we're on your Discord. It's evident there. It's evident in the rule book. I was looking at the instructions on the text-based video game, and there's pictures from like a backers day where the backers got together and meet. Is that
Yeah,
right?
we all came together at Pinewood Studios. Came to have a look at my offices and stuff, and just have a little walk around. Sneaked onto the James Bond set. Don't tell anybody that we sneaked on there. And we took a very sneaky photograph, which we're not allowed to take, but we did. And I put it in the game manual for the Mysteries of Profundum. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the connected aspect of the games, though, because I think it's important to note that the idea for the Civitas universe is to have a 10-year period inside a world communicated to us through a series of games. So it starts in 2225 with Civitas Nihilium, where these cities, these great civitases, are all in competition with each other. It's the next civilization from us. So it's the idea that there are no more nations, it's all cities, and they're all private enterprises all battling out for population and for citizenship fees and all that sort of stuff. These patriots that they're called in the world. There's lots of different factions that come about during the game. And in the first game, Civitas Nihilium, you see these factions, and then one particular faction, the Draconic Brotherhood, is a cult, and they're leaving Civitas Nihilium to form their own Civitas called Civitas Theodore. And the game, The Mysteries of Profundum, the text adventure that I've just released, literally sent out to backers on like last month, I think it was the month before last. It picks up 4 years after the events of Civitas Nihilium, where the Draconic Brotherhood have come back to Civitas Nihilium to collect information on the streets so they can better equip themselves for their future migration. And it's really interesting because the people that are in the game you get to meet that are in the game previously, and those people in the game previously are all named after the backers from the first Kickstarter. So all the backers from the first Kickstarter are getting to see how their characters have evolved, and they've named locations, and so they all get to see how their locations have evolved. Some backers were bitterly disappointed when they found out that their bar was a burning a burning shell, but
Wow.
that's what happens. And then we're gonna be going from there to a civic, like we're zooming out. So we've zoomed in. Now we're zooming out to a city builder, which will have its own solo mode. So a cyberpunk city builder, which will be Civitas 2230. That's the next game after this, I think.
And that is a board game as well.
That's a board game. Yeah, that's a board game. Yeah.
Okay.
And then also I'd like to do a very cost-effective version of Civitas Nihilium called Civitas Nihilium: The Days of Decay, which is like an in a tin version of Civitas Nihilium. So it's going to be a lot less more expensive and a lot more cost-effective. Yeah, I'm trying to target around the £25 mark, something like that, but have a similar amount of cards and have that kind of fun. But again, that would be taking place during the time of the Mysteries of Profundum. So when you play the text adventure and you see things happen, like buildings get destroyed and crimes committed, the detectives come in after those crimes have happened, and that's the things that you see when you're playing this next game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that's going to be a game in the similar sort of style as Civitas Nihilium.
Yes.
In a kind of crime investigation timeline.
Yeah.
Thing. Are there any other changes that are going to be in that one?
Yeah, there will be. There'll be less. The encounters are going to be a hell of a lot less harsh. It's going to also open up for 2-player mode as well. So you'll have one player playing in the future, another player playing in the past, and you send resources to the player in the past. It's kind of like Anachrony, that mechanic in Anachrony, where you have to send things back or suffer paradoxes if you don't make good on your time thingies. I love that. I love that mechanic. Yes. I think it's so clever, and I'm totally stealing it. So I'm going to stick with it.
Yeah, you couldn't have stole a better mechanic. The more games need to play with time travel.
Honestly,
sure.
It's wicked, isn't it? Isn't it good? Time stories and Anachrony. Oh my god, give it to me. It's so good.
I really want to just go back to what you were saying there about the characters reappearing and things, because I don't know if you've come across the concept in the drama circles before of ghosting.
Yes.
In your studies, that's what it made me think of especially when I started playing the text adventure. And for anyone who's not familiar, ghosting is kind of boiled down. It's essentially, that feeling you get when you see an actor you recognize in something from something else. You see the actor who played whoever appear in a new thing, and that kind of familiarity you have with them and their previous character, and that being in drama is a kind of tool that you can use to either subvert or just have as a kind of a free template almost.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
you use that guy that everyone likes, because you want them to like this character.
Yeah, definitely.
In Civitas, I feel like it's something I'm only just on the first sort of step of experiencing at the moment, because I've only played it a little bit. But I would see names crop up that were big, important players in my game on the board game, and I'd go, I know that guy.
Yeah, exactly.
or, oh, not that guy. He kept crashing into me. He kept running me over in my game. I don't trust him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I just thought that was a really interesting tool that you've brought in there. I was wondering if that was a consideration at all for you.
Oh, 100%. I think it's really important to have characters that develop and have characters that players have an interaction with. I like the idea of a player being on a journey through something that they don't necessarily have full control over, and to go into that world kind of like a god, but not quite a god. You're kind of, you start to see them as your subjects a little bit, I think. I feel like that, especially if you're manipulating decisions of individuals.
That's really interesting.
I think it's important to suddenly see people come up and you're like, oh, that person's got a problem with XYZ. I wonder if that still exists. Oh, wow, they're now addicted to a drug. Crikey. Yeah, it's a journey, right?
Yeah, and it almost hits on parallel universes in a weird sort of way, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, definitely.
Especially with the board game and playing as different rookies or different rookie and main character, you'll be seeing a different set of crimes unfold, and maybe they're in the same universe, the same thing that's happening alongside your previous game, or maybe it's a different Civitas Nihilium, and you're kind of free to create that sort of timeline in your own brain and kind of manipulate it beyond just the original story of the first play session.
Definitely. That kind of raises the envelope, I guess, of sort of talking to you guys about where the audience came from for Civitas Nihilium, the initial Kickstarter audience. This is something that I don't tell many people about, and I kind of try to keep it secret because it's important that I do. But it's been going on for nearly 5 years now, I think. When I started my business, Liftoff Global Network, I created, my business partner and I created a screenplay for a film called Mushroom, which was about demigods that had discovered a mushroom off the coast of Iceland on an island called Surtsey. We were trying to get funding to get the film made. And I don't know if you know much about film funding, you probably do. It's impossible to get film funding, even if you've got a great script, even if you've got people attached, all that sort of stuff. It's just a nightmare. But we had all this development, all these characters, all these things ready to go. We had 3 different dimensions in the film. We had one dimension where the mushroom had arrived on Earth, and it was entering the techno scene, and it was entering like the hedonistic sort of side of things. It was then going into another world where it was claimed by a pharmaceutical company, an evil pharmaceutical company were using it to try and distribute it into the population without anybody knowing anything about it. And because the film started hitting a sort of stall in it, I had the idea that we could create something called an ARG, which is an alternative reality game, where we created a fake website and pretended to be the pharmaceutical company, and asked for people to join drug trials to become part of the drug trial. Now, the idea was that we would then present to an investor our guaranteed audience. We did this, but we ended up at one stage, we had over 250 players playing this alternative reality game. We left a floppy disk with a cipher written on it in a back street in Tokyo. In Shibuya-Q, and they found it. It was a geocache, and they found it by following a series of clues, and they discovered it. And when they discovered it, one of the characters got sucked into a dimensional portal and ended up in the Civitas universe. And
that's incredible.
And that's the character Theo, one of the members of the Brotherhood of the Draconic Brotherhood.
And he's encased in light. He's
encased in there. Yeah. Now they're trying to get players from the players have now shifted themselves whilst they've been playing the game. They've shifted into another dimension where Mushroom the film no longer exists and the Civitas Universe series of games exists. So I came to Kickstarter with 150 players ready to back Civitas Nihilium, and that's the reason why it became successful quite quickly, I think. And it's one of the reasons why there's a lot of stuff going on in there that doesn't really make too much sense. But if you wanted to jump down the rabbit hole, just check out Mushroom ARG wiki, and you can go there and have a look at all the stuff that's happened. We've left discs in New York, in California. We actually left an Ethereum coin on a floppy disk in Elephant Hill in Los Angeles. And these players played this game, and they found the disc and got the coin and made $600. Annoyingly, they sold their coins, which is annoying because if they had them, they'd be worth quite a bit now. But yeah, that's why the currency in Civitas Nihilium is Ether. It's Ethereum.
Wow, I can't believe that. So we came here thinking we'd be talking about 2 games and that you have a few more lined up, but there's also one before, a secret one that
the Mushroom ARG, yeah.
Wow.
And it's if you look up Cicadia 3.3, I think it's just Cicadia something or Cicadia. I can't pronounce it properly, but it was an ARG that was ran for a few years. It sent a bunch of kids to a lamppost in Berlin to solve a clue. They solved it, and they all went missing for a week, and then came back with brand new haircuts and new clothes, and everyone thought they'd been recruited by the CIA, which they think they might have done. So there's all sorts of weird and wonderful ARGs out there, and ours was a labour of love for many, many years. And because the film couldn't get made, we had to do something else. So the Civitas universe was created off the back of that.
Let's just take a step back for a second.
Sure.
For listeners who are struggling to follow along at the moment, ARG, what is an ARG? Explain this just for
an alternative reality game. So you may get telephone calls, emails, you might receive a text message off of characters so that exist within the game, asking you to do things, telling you to go to places, and you are part of a wider network of other players that are all playing at the same time. And your first job is to find the other people that are playing the game. That's easily done on the internet, especially if you drop a YouTube video with a hidden message in it or something like that. They come together, they formed a Discord channel, and then they start the process of deciphering the clues that we leave out and leave behind to try and get the player more and more and more immersed into the storyline of the actual world that we're presenting. So yeah, alternative reality games. The film The Game is a really good reference, I think.
Interesting. That's so fascinating. That's kind of blown my mind a little bit. I don't really know how to. I don't even know how to respond to that. But that's wild.
This is what happens when a mad actor / film producer decides he wants to build a board game.
Yeah, it gets meta.
Gets a little bit enthusiastic about messing stuff up. It's been an absolute joy, and I love every single one of the players that have played it. There's a really good bunch of guys that play it, and they're just such a good bunch, and the door's always open for more players. And
so whilst we're talking about this, do you have a Discord community, don't you?
We do, yes, we do have a Discord community for the Civitas Universe. Yep, and that's I guess we'll give you guys the link for the show notes. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
perfect.
Links are in the description now.
It's in the description. Yeah, wonderful. And we're only ever going to be releasing Civitas Universe games via Kickstarter campaigns, just because I want to make sure that they're successful. So I don't want to dilute the opportunity of doing it. And I try to make the pledge target, I try to make it as little as possible so it gets realized. And the only way to really do that is to encourage people to back it. So when we do launch Kickstarters, I'm going to be including copies of Civitas Nihilium, copies of the Mysteries of Profundum, and copies of the next game that we're launching the Kickstarter for. So there's always going to be an opportunity to jump straight in at the beginning if you wish.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because it's not required. You could play the text-based adventure without playing the board game.
100%.
But from playing the two, there is a kind of grander experience at play.
Yeah.
That sort of idea is very well recognized at the moment. You don't have to go too far into popular culture to see that happening. Like in the MCU, right, is a really good example. Like you could go see Thor 2 in the cinema on its own, having not seen any others, and it makes sense, right? But you're going to have a wider appreciation if you've seen the 20,000 other films that they've
Yeah.
churned out. And I think Civitas nails that as well. And I think, it's something that I think a lot of gamers are gravitating towards. You see a lot of games set in the same universe, Gloomhaven, Frosthaven, Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion, where there's these kind of reoccurring characters. People want to invest in that kind of real world. They want to see real stories. And I think having that intertextuality, that kind of continuity that's really important in Civitas is, super popular at the moment. And even on a micro level, with things like legacy games, the success of, Pandemic Legacy, the idea that what you've done in the previous game is going to affect, your next play. Civitas doesn't do that on a sort of micro level, but on a macro, you have this kind of whole experience at your fingertips.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought long and hard about that point what you just raised there, Norm, about the legacy aspect of it, which when you complete the Mysteries of Profundum, it gives you a calculation on your setup for the next game, how much resources you should have and what you should be doing. So if you want to take the experience onto the next bit, you can. That was my kind of way of trying to teeter onto the legacy part, but I think it's good to kind of have it in the theatre of the mind as well. So you know who the president is now, because that's changed, and but it's only changed in your game. So you're taking it with you in an imagination part of it. They always say, like, when you're writing scripts and stuff, never to include the sex scene, because we've all got a better idea of how the characters get it on than what the director or the actors might have. So just leave it to the imagination of the people that are watching, and they can form a better scenario for it. Like, oh, he's been down there because that's happened, or these guys are attacking us because of this, or however you want to build it.
So just to clarify, when you say for the next game, you're referring to the next board game, the City Builder, which isn't even out yet. That's what you're referring to.
Yeah, I'm referring to that. Yeah, I've got a prototype of the City Builder on Tabletopia that I'm working on at the moment, and I've got a good idea as to how the resources and how the general setup is going to work. The idea is that you have one player playing with a massive city already set up, Civitas Nihilium, and all the other players are playing as presidents of smaller cities. And Civitas Nihilium is in its days of decay. People are leaving and all this sort of stuff. So that player has to try and stop that from happening, whilst the other players are all fighting for the ones that are leaving. So that the way that how you set up your game could be based on either the setup parameters in the manual or the setup parameters that are revealed to you when you've completed the Mysteries of Profundum, based on the resources and the things that you got from that game.
How interesting, because you're moving then from two games that were solo experiences, and I just wanted to hit on quickly before I make this point that you're talking about the legacy aspect being entirely almost in the mind of the viewer. The legacy isn't the game state changing, isn't it? But it is your interpretation of the events and the characters, and your knowledge of the events and the world around you that changes you as the audience to the gaming experience. Change. It does feel very dramery in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when you invite players to come and play the game at your house or the game with you online, they're entering your universe, and you can,
right,
and you can go and play in somebody else's. So in your Civitas universe, Scruffy, your Civitas universe might be someone completely different as the president. The situation in Civitas Nihilium is now petered out and everything's okay, and the player playing that might have a completely different experience to you coming over to mine and playing in my Civitas universe. So the idea is for it to be completely different every time, for it to just split. As soon as a different player gets involved, the entire paradigm, the entire experience is totally different, but tailored towards the vision of the player that's kind of leading the experience, which is why the emphasis is so strongly on the solo player aspect, because the solo player is the one that does the invitation.
I would be really interested to see if, that sounds fascinating in itself, but in terms of just for my own logistics and obviously for us as solo board gamers, I'd be very interested to see if the new game is adaptable to having an AI as well. That would be,
yes, that's the challenge.
Yeah, but We'll park that for now, yeah.
So I feel like Civitas Nihilium will be the city that does its own thing, and it's self-running, and you choose which Civitas to go up against with it, I guess, and just see how it goes with that. That would be the best. That would be the best thing, I think. But I love that. I love that that idea of there being this like maniacal beast that's just wounded that you're kind of sucking blood from. It's a very interesting idea and kind of
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So just returning quickly to stuff that's out, I did want to touch on the soundtrack.
Yes.
We mentioned before that you've created to go along with the game, and it enhances the experience of the game for you. How did that come about?
So I'm really into retro computing. I love old computers. Hence the reason why the text adventure looks like it was built on a C64. It's on a Commodore 64, like an 8-bit kind of style. Hence the reason why the games are all pixel art as well. The printed games are pixel art.
Gorgeous art.
I love that. Yeah, thank you. I absolutely love that style. I love the retro sort of feel. And I love chip tunes. I love synthwave. I love vaporwave. I love the things that go hand in hand with the cyberpunk experience. And I wanted to create a soundtrack that would have a voice acted tapestry that kind of took you through an introductory journey to the world, but at the same time gave you focus and also got you into like the sort of the mood, just to try my hardest to emulate the same feeling that I had sat playing Lord of the Rings, with the soundtrack on, just that moment where like the music for the Shire's playing and I'm at the beginning of my game. It's like I just it just fits so well. It's just so good. And I tried in my absolute novice way to kind of try and get something like that going, and I think I succeeded to a certain degree, and I'm very pleased with it. But it's like I said, it was an absolute pain in the backside to get right. There was points where I got it mastered and the sound was on one speaker, then it moves over to another, and it wasn't right, and then it was the boom and fade was everywhere, and everything was just so wrong, and that was so stressful. But got there in the end, and very pleased with it. And yeah, like I said, that's where the value in the game is, really, because it's where I spent all my money.
Okay, James, so I think we're winding down towards the end of the show, but before we dive into looking at the responses we got from last episode, why don't you share the sort of development roadmap and what's out already for the Civitas universe and what's coming out in the future? So we've already spoken about the board game, which is out, the Civitas Nihilium. We've spoken about the Mysteries of Profundum, the text-based adventure video game. We know that there's a city builder coming up as well, which is another board game.
Yep, that's a board game, Civitas 2230.
Is there anything after that? What else is coming?
Yes, so I'm going to be, once all of that content is created, we're teetering on the idea of creating a more cost-effective version of Civitas Nihilium, which is called Civitas Nihilium: The Days of Decay. That's going to be possibly a smaller in card number, certainly on the witnesses side, but a little bit more of an easier setup, a quicker go-to, a more cost-effective version of the game itself. After all of that, the big plan is to create an RPG.
Ooh,
that's the aim. And if I can get it anywhere near as good as Shadowrun or the Cyberpunk Red or anything like that, I will be very, very pleased. I really, really, really love the solo mechanic of the Mythic GM emulator. I love it loads.
Oh my God, have you tried Ironsworn?
Oh, of course. Yet? Oh my God, I've got Ironsworn. I'm looking at Ironsworn right now. I love it. It's excellent.
So good, isn't it?
It's excellent. So, I mean, if you like Ironsworn, I implore you to try 1,000-Year-Old Vampire. It's wonderful as well. If I can get the Civitas, if I can get a solo player RPG experience of Ironsworn and the 1,000-Year-Old Vampire combined, I'll be so pleased. And I think that's the aim, really. And whilst I'm building the next things, I'm adding all this extra content because I know that content is paramount with RPG. You really do.
Well, if you succeed in that ambition, James, we'll probably have you back on to talk about it again.
Yay! I would love to come back on. You guys rock. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, it's been awesome having you on. I mean, you're an absolute treat to listen to.
Excellent. So brilliant. So a soloable RPG is the end goal, and I think that's so cool coming at the end once you've built up all this understanding of the world and the law, etc. You've already got all this. I think Sean Tomkin, when we had him on the show, he called it grist for the mill to start
Yes.
stories. I think that's awesome. Okay, then. So we've reached that point in the show where we move on to the responses we got from the last episode. But before we do that, let's reveal the question for this episode. So, Scruffy, what's the question for today's episode?
So the question this episode is, how highly do you rate storytelling in your solo board gaming experience? So we're mainly focusing on board games, not RPGs here. And we want to know where storytelling comes in terms of importance for you when you're playing. And does a good story override any dissatisfaction with the game in other aspects? For example, is it okay to lose player choice if you end up having a wicked story moment that comes out of that loss of agency?
And is it any different when you're playing multiplayer? Is your solo preference different? I know mine is very different. My favorite solo game is Mage Knight, and my favorite multiplayer game is 1830, which is about trains. So my preferences are they're both obviously heavy games, but in terms of theme and story, they're very different. And I'm wondering if that's the same with you guys. Is it more important in the solo experience, or is it less important? You can, as always, contact us through all the normal streams, which I'll come on to at the end of the show. But yes.
Just quickly, before we move on from that, just don't be afraid. I mean, that's a pretty big and hefty question. Don't be afraid to just say, I don't care about story. I'd be happy to hear that. Like, I'm only interested when I play board games in this side of board gaming. That's interesting to hear as well. So bit of a long question there, but happy for you to respond on whatever level you're comfortable responding on.
Okay, so let's check out the responses we got from the last episode. So during the last episode, we asked you, can you name an example of random elements in games that you've liked and disliked? So why did one work and the other not? So we had a first response from Pickles, and Pickles says, good random can be dramatic endings to games that you do not get in the ones where, for example, you just build an overwhelming force and then win. For example, in Gloomhaven needing to flip a +1 and then you get a null. Or War Machine needing double 6 followed by 15 on 3 dice. Legends of Drizzle coming down to a win or lose die roll. Lord of the Rings LCG Escape from Dol Guldur with massive effort. They managed to kill Nazgul on 49 threat, but next turn they had to reshuffle and flip the Nazgul, which says you cannot win while the Nazgul is in play. I could not kill it, and my threat increased to 50, so I lost. Or Spirit Island. So these are dimensionally more memorable than any number of games where I just took control, then ground down the opposition. Bad random would be randomized start conditions that favor one or the other side. This is really bad if it's in a boring way or if you find out partway through. The most boring way is score a random number of victory points. See, for example, several Stegmaier games. There's some scenarios in Game Workshop's Dead Fleet and Fantasy Flight's Imperial Assault that do this. You need a random number of victory points to win. There's a lot to unpack there,
Well, that really hits on what we just asked, doesn't it?
Exactly. Those sort of random elements there. And a lot of those examples that Pickle said, it surprised me because they were kind of bad examples. There are examples, or quote unquote bad examples, where actually the randomness meant that they lost, But they're saying that actually made the game much more exciting. And I sympathize with that a lot. I get exactly what Pickles is saying. I'm wondering what you think of that, Scruffy.
I'm not sure. I mean, I totally get it. Like, randomness, I think, feels less bad when you've got that reward afterwards of having a good story to tell. I mean, it's the worst is if you get a loss and there's nothing to tell. Like the examples there of just a randomized setup, and it's negative for you, get a bad outcome, and there's no story there. Oh yeah, I had a really rubbish startup. That's not a story, But if you've got these moments where you have even good randomness is always kind of, I think, to some extent feels okay and good. Like there's that sort of loss aversion we talked about before, and that it is real game theory, isn't it? That you can get away with randomness in design a lot more if it's good, but it's only really problematic for the player when it gives you a negative outcome, and that is mitigated to some extent by having a story then to tell if it's a dramatic moment, right?
I want to chip in with that one as well. I think that it's really important to recognize that the player needs to prepare themselves for the randomness as well. You need to make sure that you're equipped. And usually what tends to be the case is when a designer, this is what I've certainly noticed in the games that I've played, when a designer is incorporating an aspect of randomness, they will give you opportunities to deal with that potential randomness occurring earlier on in the game. It's not just suddenly here's something random, boom, here it is. There will be something that will enable you to kind of not fix the outcome in your favor, but certainly do something that will help you to survive if the worst was to happen.
Or just prepare yourself for it.
Prepare, yeah, exactly. Prepare yourself for it, precisely. And I feel like randomness needs to be earned. I think it needs to be earned. It needs to exist in a game for a reason. You know, if it doesn't exist for a particular thematic reason, then it just falls flat on its face, in my opinion.
And I think it's all about the framing as well. It's all about the framing. I know Cole Worley mentioned, the designer of Root mentioned that, you know, one thing that he wants to do with Root is get players attacking each other as soon as possible, so that players knew this is a game where we're going to have fights and we're going to have negative player interaction. And I think it's the same with randomness. If you're introduced to it halfway through the game where you've built up a big engine and then you have a swingy random moment where that is taken away from you, that will feel really terrible because it's not framed well. It's not, you know, expected. If you go into a game and several random events happen at the start, it almost frames the experience and, okay, this is a game where the randomness is going to be impactful, and how am I going to account for that? And is this something I'm going to enjoy? And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and just bringing this back to Civitas Nihilium. I've been saying it right all episode, haven't I, James?
No, that's fine.
But just bringing it back to CN.
Nice.
For me, especially, I really had to do a bit of a mental readjustment to be able to engage with the game in a way that I don't experience in most games. You know, it was that you have to really frame the game as being prepared for that randomness, getting yourself mentally ready to just get sucked down a dystopian cyberpunk random hole.
There you go, James. Put that on the box.
Be prepared to get sucked down. Scruffy Gamer 2021. Oh dear. Okay, next one. So we have a response here from Cooper, who says, I'm not opposed to randomness in games, but I think it's important that there is the possibility to influence results. I like the mechanism in Robinson Crusoe where you can accept a random outcome by using the dice or avoid an additional worker and get the intended result. That's a great choice to make. I also think that there is a big difference for me when it comes to randomness, whether I'm playing solo or multiplayer. For instance, the random goal cards in Hallertau by Uwe Rosenberg, I'm not familiar with that title, sorry if I said it wrong, don't bother me much when I play solo. I'm happy to draw a big point card in the last round, but don't build my strategy upon that. But when I play Lisboa by Vital Losada, 3 players, someone won by drawing the right goal card during their last turn. That left a bad taste in my mouth, especially because Lisboa is such a long game. Way back, I played Arkham Horror 2nd Edition with my partner. She hated that game so much because after 5 hours of playing, we lost because of a single dice throw. I think that was the worst offender when it comes to randomness. In general, the more narrative a game has, the less I am annoyed by random elements. But I also like having some random elements in my heavy strategy games. It can add variation and excitement as long as the randomness is such that it can be planned with. A good example for me are the hunting and exploration actions in A Feast for Odin. You throw dice, but you can influence the outcome to your advantage, and even if you miss, you get a small bonus. I think it adds a bit of excitement and uncertainty in an otherwise very strategic game. Wow, what a hefty response there, and it again touches on the question for this episode. So this will be a fun exploration of the topic to unpack further on this channel. Yeah, and again, hitting on contingencies there and having mitigation and the prepared stuff that you were mentioning, James.
Yeah.
Any thoughts from you two on that?
If I can, just framing it back to last episode, did you notice that a lot of those examples, the dice rolling in Feast for Odin, the dice rolling in Robinson Crusoe, were all output random events that Cooper was describing? I thought that was interesting, where it's just one of those things where people tend to want to justify the existence of output randomness much more than input, because of the way it, as Kendall said in the last episode, divorces the decision from the outcome. And I just a little observation that I had and I thought was fascinating is all. Anything you want to add to that response, James?
I love the story about the couple that were playing. The girl got completely jaded by the idea of playing for ages and ages and ages, and then lost on a single dice roll. I kind of crave players to have those experiences because I think that it's life, and the perils of that kind of thing can really expose, what's the word? I guess the enthusiasm or the commitment. I mean, if I'm playing a game where I think, oh my God, I could die any second now, I'm upgrading when it's my turn to upgrade. I'm spending my ether to do the things I need to do. I'm making sure that I go to the safer places first. I'm doing all the different things. I'm taking everything into consideration. I'm using all my special abilities. I'm not missing stuff out. I bet you that couple missed a few things out.
Yeah, maybe. And I think it also mainly goes to a thing of framing that we mentioned before, that perhaps this person wasn't prepared for that outcome.
Yeah, completely.
At the start of the game, perhaps it may have been said, but you can hear, we might lose on a dice roll at the end, but you might not register it because it won't happen to me. And I had a very similar experience. I don't want to spoil anything for my Wretched playthrough up on YouTube, but I had a very similar experience going into Wretched when I settled down to play it, which was, I'm special. I'm going to do this. I'm really good at games. And so to some extent, but that sort of framing there enhanced the experience for me. I think bringing it back to more regular examples, like playing a game like Civitas or even Arkham there, that you need to sit down and be prepared to know that you can invest a lot of time and energy in something and you might still lose the game. Your characters might die, but it's okay because you will be enriched by the experience.
Excellent. So the next response we had in was from Slasher. They have one paragraph of randomness they liked and one paragraph of randomness they disliked.
Do you want to do the like and I'll do the dislike, since this is our last one for the episode?
That sounds perfect.
Let's add some drama.
So they said they liked that their group had a game of Arkham Horror 2nd Edition where they were cruising and only needed to close one more gate. One player was at an open gate and just needed to succeed by rolling a 5 or a 6 from 3 d6 dice. 5 consecutive failures over 5 rounds saw a snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. We still talk about it years later when he has an important dice roll to make.
They wouldn't be talking about it if he won, though, would they?
That's very interesting. They say it worked because that kind of randomness is expected going into Arkham Horror 2nd Edition.
Yes.
And the cooperative nature of the game meant that the misfortune was shared equally. And this is, again, everything we're saying about the framing is important here.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that it's how funny that followed Cooper's response, who said it was the worst offender. It just shows you also how big a factor personal preferences as well.
Yes.
Oh, it's subjective. It's so subjective.
So if they like that one, what did they dislike? So Slusher says the one that really didn't work for them was Dice Settlers. It's a dice bag building game that shares a lot of DNA with 4X games. One of the best parts of 4X games for me is the tech tree and planning ahead. However, I found that the double hit of randomness from randomly drawing the dice, then rolling to decide which actions you could take made it hard to plan ahead. I was playing solo and attempting to pursue a research-heavy strategy, but I kept falling over at either the draw or the roll hurdles. In that case, it was the mismatch between my expectations of the level of strategy or long-term planning in a genre of game and the amount of control I actually had over my actions. Well, it does feel horrible to have this kind of investment in putting the dice that you can control into the bag, hoping you get them, and then, oh, phew, I finally got the dice I need, but rolling the wrong side of it. Wow.
Sounds to me like he needs to practice rolling dice.
get them weighted just right, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's really interesting that Slusher knows where the problem was. The problem was between their expectation of what level of strategy was going to be involved and what the actual game itself was. Maybe if Slusher had a different expectation, it would have been. But you know, it's again, the game framed itself as a planny 4X type game where you can plan multiple turns ahead. And it turns out that that's not the game it is, which is it's fascinating.
Cool. So, any final thoughts for the episode, James?
Oh, I just had a great time, guys. It's been a real pleasure. I'm so pleased that you've given it a go and have had me on today to talk about it. I'm really excited about what's in store for what's coming up in the universe. Really, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for sending us a copy of the games and for coming on and spending your time this evening with us to talk about everything. It's been an absolute delight for me, and I'm sure it has for you too, Norm. Am I right?
Yeah, James, you were super fascinating. And I leave now with an even deeper appreciation for the Civitas universe, especially now knowing about the ARG beforehand and all the stories behind it. Oh, sorry.
Yes, nice.
But I have such deeper appreciation for it now, which is interesting. That I've come into the episode thinking, okay, I get it, and then I've left going, wow, there's actually so much more to explore than I even thought.
Yeah, when I said we don't need to scratch the surface, I wasn't joking. Like, I feel like in even the amount of time we've had to play it, we haven't got close to unraveling this beast.
Oh, I need to do more interviews.
but yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Just to remind the listeners, the question for this episode was, what was it, Scruffy?
So just to reiterate the question then for this episode, it is, how important is story to you in a solo board gaming experience? And to what extent does it mitigate anything that you don't enjoy about a gaming experience when you play a game, having a good story or a dramatic moment?
Excellent. And if you want to respond to that question, you can do so through several means. Of course, you can reach out on our Discord. The links to that are in the description. It's free to join. So we'll see you over there. You can also email us. We're always player1podcast@gmail.com. Of course, you can reach out on Facebook and on Instagram. The links to both are in the description. We're on Instagram as @alwaysplayer1podcast. We're also on Reddit. You can catch us in the solo board gaming subreddit, and it's always_player_1. Of course, if you'd like to support the show, you can check us out on Patreon. If you will join us on Patreon, you'll get access to our behind-the-scenes planning phase show, which is getting really exciting at the moment because we have so much coming up. You can also support us on Coffee. Just go over there and buy us a cup of coffee. We'll use that money to get ourselves a copy of Lost Ruins of Arnak, which we're really looking forward to covering on the show. Alternatively, another way to support the show is to tell someone about us. We love when you guys chat about us online. What you say about us is much more effective than any kind of promotional post I could write, any kind of paid advertisement, not that we've ever done that, but any type of advertisement we can do is pretty much null and void compared to one positive recommendation online. So you guys have the power to make the show even better. But yeah, that's pretty much everything for myself. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll catch you in a week if you're over on the Patreon on the planning phase. And if not, we'll catch you in 2 weeks for another episode of Always Player One.
Thank you guys for listening, and thank you again, James, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the show, don't forget to check out our Patreon page. The links to that are in the description. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Always Player One. Until then, reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or by email to keep the conversation going.